It's easy to become the hermit that I want to be, isolated from the world, but that won't do anybody any good. I'd love to talk about superficial things like the weather, gas prices, or Justin Trudeau's hair. But we live in a global village. No country is an island, and nothing happens in a vacuum. Justin Trudeau's hair is on the man who will determine our foreign policy, establish our presence on the world stage, whether good or bad. Talking about the weather is just one step away from talking about climate change and the importance of reduce, reuse, and recycle, as well as finding alternative sources to non-renewable fuels that we're using. And the gas prices. Well, the gas itself has its own bloody history. We are so removed and disconnected from the facts, and we're almost ignorant of the impacts of our choices. And why is Syria so important right now? For years, the UN has been calling it the greatest humanitarian crisis of our modern history. But by the end of 2013, nobody seemed to mind that hundreds of thousands of Syrians were killed, that millions have been displaced to Jordan and other neighboring countries, living in deplorable conditions. And some people forget that the Syrians aren't coming from cozy Syrian homes. Those homes were destroyed years ago through civil war and other atrocities. And they've been displaced this whole time. Displaced is such a kind word for the hard life they're living. They've been displaced and living in tent cities and dealing with the elements and dealing with things like makeshift toilets. And over 50% of the Syrian refugees are children. And those are the children that survived, the ones that weren't beheaded, murdered, and burned. Before the sectarian violence and the rise of ISIS, there was the Assad regime. And in the wake of Arab Spring, everything's just been getting worse and worse in Syria. But Western first world countries seem to be more concerned about the new iPhone or the birth of Prince George, and weren't really concerned about events that were happening in a country that most couldn't even place on a map. We didn't seem to care on any scale that could have an impact until dead children were literally washing up on our shores. And fast forward to today, where we've got millions asking for our help, crying for our help. And after the Paris attack, which was a horrible open attack on a modern Western city, just as bad as the attacks in Lebanon and other cities in that same week, but those that had a history of violence and thus easily ignored by the media. But after the Paris attacks, there were a strong few that seemed more concerned about shutting the doors to the refugees altogether and maybe worrying more about our own homelessness issues or the economy. They were more concerned about terrorists infiltrating through these refugees that we were welcoming, or at least trying to, with open arms. I still find it difficult to understand why anybody would purposely not help those in desperate need, more worried about what could be rather than what is, and still fail to realize that helping a Syrian refugee and helping those with our homelessness crisis aren't mutually exclusive duties. We can do both, or at least we can try. And don't get me started on what I think about Black Friday, which is a violent shopping experience with acts similar to what are banned by the Geneva Convention, or continued institutionalized racism against people of color, which hasn't gotten any better since Ferguson was thrown into the spotlight. Or even the jerk-face rich guy who is currently running for president. One little passive guy from Canada may not have really great effect on the world stage. I can't change the world myself, but the world itself can certainly change me. Either I can become angry, bigoted, more indifferent, and learn to hate all my neighbors, or either I can become more understanding, empathetic, and kind, and welcoming to my new neighbors of all races and religions. In an increasingly violent world, for us to survive, for us all to survive, we need to choose kindness. What the world needs now is compassion.